John Hendrick, Senior Technical Writer for Wallaroo. Today we're going to be exploring how to use Azure ML with a Wallaroo instance. Wallaroo is the last mile between your data scientists and ML ops. This is where we're going to take the models and all the work that the data scientists do in generating models, training them, selecting which models are the best one, retraining them on occasion. From there, these models can be imported into the Wallaroo engine, where they can be added into a pipeline and then used in a production flow. So, for example, credit card fraud, going from training the model and then putting into Wallaroo, where you can start throwing at the data that you need to determine is a transaction a credit card fraud or not, and do it in a high-speed, efficient manner. In this video, we're going to be getting into our Azure ML environment. From there, we're going to be adding the Wallaroo SDK and showing the steps to do so. We'll then be making a connection into a live Wallaroo instance and then doing some data inferencing from there. So we'll go into more of these steps later on, but let's start right away with getting to Azure ML and then from there installing the SDK. The steps are available on the Wallaroo documentation site at docs.wallaroo.ai, and from there we also have links to our GitHub repository where you can find a complete list of these tutorials, the notebooks involved, and the like. All right, so as we can see here, we're inside our Azure environment. So we're going to go into Azure ML and select our environment, which is this one right here. This is my Wallaroo DocML test that I've set up, and we can launch our studio. Now, for those of you familiar with Azure ML, you'll know that the main areas that you can get into your data, your notebooks and the like, we're only going to be focusing on two areas today. First is the notebook. So I'm going to open up a notebook that I've out there. This is, again, part of the Wallaroo documentation site that can show how to install the Wallaroo SDK into your Azure ML environment. The first thing we're going to do is install the Wallaroo SDK into our Azure ML environment. And we're going to do that using Conda. So let me get this going here. We've got our notebook, and I've got the instructions already set inside of it. We have our compute environment. So we're going to start off with creating our virtual environment with Conda. The only thing I'm going to change here is calling this SDK2, just because I've already got one called SDK. All right, letting that install. We say yes, go ahead and import in all those libraries into this virtual environment. Excellent, and now it's done. We will activate it. And good. All right, the next we're going to do is add in the library IPy-kernel, and this way we can import it into our Jupyter notebook. So go ahead and let it do that part. See the Jupyter client, we see all the other pieces. All right, while that's finishing up, let me copy this, and then we're going to add that as a piece into our Jupyter Hub kernels, so it knows where it's at. Okay. Now the last thing to do is install the Wallaroo SDK. The current version is 22.4.0, and if you go to PyPy, you can find that entire release history there. So we're going to go back into here and add that in. All right, the Wallaroo SDK is now installed. We'll verify that by coming up into our list of kernels. I'm actually going to exit this notebook real quick and then load it back up. First thing we'll do is we'll be importing our Wallaroo SDK library. Let me make that just a little bit bigger for everyone out there viewing. And we're going to make a connection out here to a development environment called Squishy Wallaroo. We'll need to authenticate. It says I've already done that in the past, so I can tell it yes, grant access. And now we can start going. For those of you who have not run Wallaroo before, Wallaroo works at the workspace level. So in this case, we're going to be creating a new workspace, which is this Azure ML SDK workspace. I put JCH, my initials at the front, just for uniqueness. And then from there, what happens is you load a model into the workspace, you create pipelines in the workspace, and add models as pipeline steps. And the pipeline then becomes the main target of the inferences. That's where you're going to feed it the inference information and get the outputs. So one workspace may have multiple models inside of it. It may have multiple pipelines. It may have these pipelines with different models and different configurations or different steps. Let's go ahead and start off. So we're going to go ahead and set some variables here so we can load up. And then this is a little helper mechanism that we've come up with to help us quickly make these things. So we're going to go ahead and create our workspace. We'll set it as our current workspace. This will let any new commands we do, again, model uploads, pipeline creations, be set inside this workspace. And then we're going to make our pipeline and give it the name that we set back up here. All right, that is done. It let us know. It created the pipeline and all the information on it. We can also add some tags to it. Those are from other tutorials and the like. But this way, it's a way of managing your pipelines or pipeline versions. All right, we're going to verify to show the current workspace. We see that's where we're at. It tells us we have a pipeline in here. No models yet. So let's go ahead and upload our model. Now, the model we're using here is called the Aloha demo. This was created to detect whether a URL was a real URL or some sort of fraudulent one. Something's being used for phishing or the like. And it returns back a probability of whether or not a given URL is good or bad. All right, so we've uploaded our model. We're now going to add this model as a step into our pipeline. So this way, when the model is given inference information, it feeds it into there. And now we'll deploy the model. This is where the resources are allocated to actually run the pipeline. So it has a set number of CPUs, a set number of memory that's being used, and from that point on, it'll be ready to run until we undeploy it. This usually takes about a good 15 to 45 seconds. As you can see, we're already done. And we can verify that with the pipeline status. It tells us the pipeline is running. The pipeline name tells us, okay, here's the model that you used and the version of that model, so we can upload new versions of that same model later on if we need to. And let's go ahead and run a sample inference. So we're going to submit to our pipeline. We're going to give it a file and say infer from this file. And that file is this JSON file that includes some data that we can show off if we need to later. All right, the inference is already done. Now we'll get the data from it. All right, so with that one done, let's go ahead and keep going. And we're going to run this time a series of inferences. We can submit all of these in a batch mode. So what we're going to do this time is use an external URL. What this lets us do is retrieve the pipeline's API reference. This way we can submit inference requests directly there via an API call. So we're going to get our URL. So this is the URL for that deployed pipeline. And that way we can now talk to it. We're going to get our token, our JWT token, to authenticate to it. Won't do any good because by the time you see it, it's going to be expired. But now we'll go ahead and make that connection to our URL. Going to feed our token to authenticate. And we're going to feed it about 25,000 records in one go. And we'll see how long that takes. This is running on I believe, about a 32 CPU cluster. All right, we have submitted our information. It is transferring it. And we're almost done. And we are complete. So 13 seconds for about 25,000 records. And if we go into here, we can now take a look and see those results. It's going to take a little bit to load up. It may take longer to load the response file than it did to infer. There we go. All right, so we can see here we have the model that was used for the inferences, the model version, and then here's our return data. So now we can go through all of these different results and start to track which of these URLs are fraudulent or not. So a lot of data that we can use there. All right, and now just to be good and proper citizens to our test environment, we're going to undeploy this pipeline. This returns the resources back to the cluster. So after this point, we can't do any more inferences on it unless we redeploy that pipeline again. And really with that, our tutorial will be complete. Again, you can find the rest of this information if you go to the Wallaroo documentation site at docs.wallaroo.ai. A copy of this developer guide showing you how to install the Azure ML Wallaroo SDK is right there. It's the exact same steps you viewed, or you can download the sample notebook with the sample data and models available through the Wallaroo tutorials GitHub repository. So thank you very much for attending and welcome to Wallaroo.